Jim Brown has already introduced himself, and he's been working with me this semester. And he's formerly in the CTE department up at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, and we've known each other for a long, long time.
Yes, sir.
And I want to thank you, Jim, for being with us today and co-hosting the seminar today. And I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Bill Watson. Bill's been here for several years now and is doing just outstanding work in so many emerging areas of technology. And he's the go-to person in game theory and such. And now we're moving into the age of AI, and we all have so much to know and so much to learn. And thank goodness we have folks like Bill on staff and faculty like Bill on staff who are on top of all this and appreciate it. And thank you for your valuable time, Bill, for joining us today. Appreciate it. And I'm going to give the floor to you. Take it away.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Jim. So I'm going to be talking about education in the what I'm calling the disinformation age. And as Jim mentioned, some of my one hat I wear is as the director for the Purdue Center for Serious Games, Learning in Virtual Environments. But I'm also chair of our college's working group on data science and AI. So I'll kind of talk about the path to where that's led me to that and pushed me to not only talk about how we can leverage AI for transformative purposes, but also how we need to protect against AI. So my career is focused on learning and systems design for the information age. And basically that started with a focus on educational video games, game-based learning as a way to engage our learners better. I started off teaching at the now defunct IUPUI and computer technology and had two very different groups of students there. I had students who were coming fresh out of K-12 and then students who had not been in school for, decade plus and now were coming back from the workforce to get degrees. And that really highlighted to me the difference in those types of students and that those who had been out of formal education were highly engaged, highly self-directed in their learning. And those who were coming right out of K-12 were the opposite. They were very disengaged. They were not reflective and they were not directing their own learning at all. So for me, the answer to that was game-based learning at that time. But as I went to grad school to work on my PhD, I started to get more interested in what's going on in our formal learning environments to be creating this sort of passive learner. And ultimately, I ended up working with my mentor, Charlie Reigeluth, who focused on systemic change and systems design for education, essentially saying that we need to change the system because our old system was designed not for learning, but for sorting of learners. So it largely came out in the industrial age where our focus was very much on sorting learners into managers and factory line workers. And by and large, that's where our system is today. It's much more efficient than it used to be, but still we are driven by time. We're driven by the school calendar, whether we're talking the Purdue calendar or whether we're talking the K-12 calendar. It's the semester and the course structure that's determining when we move on, not whether or not the students have actually learned. So this sort of approach is essentially, we know that people differ. We know people learn at different rates, learn different things better, more easily than others. So if we're holding time constant, we're essentially forcing student performance to vary rather than focusing on ensuring that all learners are mastering the content. We instead say we're going to teach this content in this amount of time. This is how much time you have to learn that. Those who can learn go on. Those who can't fail, or those who learn some move forward with learning deficiencies. That's particularly problematic because today's society is not a society where we do the same job over and over for our entire careers, or indeed even have the same career throughout our lives. Now things have changed so that we need a focus that's more on effectiveness and mastery of learning rather than efficiency, because we need to create lifelong learners people who are able to acquire new skills, who need to identify problems and new methods of solving them, to collaborate with others on the best way to do that, to encounter new novel problems, complex problems that don't have easy answers, and figure out how to solve them. So society today looks very different. And even working with Dr. Reigeluth back, 20 years ago, we were talking about how society has shifted to the information age, but our educational systems were still designed for the industrial age. So this is a little bit of a slide that basically identifies some of those differences, in that the industrial age is all about standardization, while the information age is about customization and personalization. The industrial age is about compliance. You're going to be told what to do, and you're going to do that over and over again, while the information age is about initiative. So even if we're talking about factories these days and assembly lines or this sort of thing, that's no longer how those people are doing those jobs. They are no longer not being asked to think. They're being asked to identify, solve problems, to direct robots and other automations to do tasks, and understand when that's not going well, and deal with data and solving problems as they arise. So even when we're talking about the factory of today, it's no longer about standardization and compliance and conformity. It's about problem solving. We have robots to do those, and automations to do those sorts of tasks that don't require thinking. We still have humans who are acting over those tasks and solving problems as they arise and directing those automations. So industrial age is about conformity. Information age is about diversity. That can be a diversity of problems, diversity of problem solvers, diversity of learning, all of that. Industrial age about adversarial relationships, where information age, we have complex problems and we have to interact with outside entities all the time to solve that. So we have to be able to collaborate and cooperate. In the industrial age, again, this autocratic leadership where you're told what to do and you're not to deviate, to a shared leadership model because problems are too complex and time is too short for waiting around to solve those. So the information age has shifted, but our educational systems by and large have not. They're driven by time. They're driven by standardization and conformity. They're driven by regurgitating knowledge rather than learning to be critical thinkers and problem solvers. So that's been kind of my mission throughout my career, is how can we leverage technology to transform the system of education to one that better suits modern societal needs. So back when I was a grad student, one of the main things we looked at were new forms of learning management system that would allow us to personalize learning. And essentially we're saying, we need to be creating lifelong learners. We need to be able to be meeting learners where they are. And if you need more time to learn something, you're given more time to learn it. And likewise, if you're advanced in a particular topic, rather than being bored and disengaged while you wait for your peers to catch up, you are able to basically move at a speed that's going to make sense for you. So AI, which has been around for decades, but not been easily accessible to everyone until the dawn of generative AI, may be the answer for that. So in learning technology, one of the core readings that we talk about is the 2 sigma problem, which is essentially saying that there's a significant difference from a classroom learning environment, learning in a classroom versus learning with one-to-one tutoring. And essentially, if we have learning reinforcement and support in there that's touching on the personalized level, we can get much closer to that one-to-one tutoring and coaching. But what AI has shown us is a great promise for personalizing more than we've ever been able to. So back when I was in grad school 20 years ago, we were talking about using computer technology to try to bridge this gap, to use learning technology to try to get much closer to a personalized sort of learning experience with one-to-one tutoring and coaching. Those concepts have been around again for decades, but we're starting to see now them be much more accessible to the everyday practitioner, the everyday instructor, the everyday learning designer, to be able to implement the sort of personalization level to really be able to get closer to that one-on-one tutoring and coaching. And we can see this whether we're talking about, Khan Academy and their Khan Migo, where they are giving AI tutors to essentially help guide learners who have questions and are struggling with particular material, not by just regurgitating answers, by asking questions, by guiding them to additional resources. So this is in the hands of kids just interacting with Khan Academy. And then certainly we've seen it, we had a presentation yesterday in College of Education about an AI tool, Notebook LM that Google offers, where you can be creating practice questions off of specific data sources that you're uploading in there. You can be creating, if your learners want to absorb content through a podcast instead of reading, you can be uploading that and then generating essentially an audio summary of that in the form of two hosts who are interacting with each other. So really appreciated that demonstration yesterday and put my son's 6th grade science project report, which he's working on this week, uploaded to that and was able to create a podcast for him to listen to where the hosts are talking about the sort of questions they might be asking in further developments and that sort of thing to help him prepare for his presentation next week. So we're able to create personalized learning and interactive learning environments way faster and easier than ever before to an amazing degree. We've gone from AI being something that was talked about to it really legitimately being in our pockets on our phones where it's accessible and we can manage it. So AI could be a significant answer for personalizing learning, which is my ultimate goal and why I've started to look heavily at AI, in that we can leverage learner data to predict learner struggles and alert teachers to potential issues before they arise. We can create customized learning interventions, assessments, and resource recommendations. We can manage and streamline administrative functions, communication functions, collaboration functions. We can have simulated tutors and offer virtual tutoring. All of that is so much more accessible than it's ever been before. Even though we've been looking at those things for decades, they've never been available to the everyman, to the typical instructor. Suddenly now they are. But AI can also be part of the problem. So we know issues are there with AI, with how the algorithms are dealing with issues of diversity, how algorithms are collecting data, how algorithms can hallucinate and create fake data. All of that is out there, is an issue. There's a lot going on that AI is doing, and we don't always have transparency in terms of how it's working and what's functioning. So while at the same time that I'm pushing AI as a way to personalize learning and transform the very nature of how we approach learning, at the same time, we have to have clear eyes of the sort of problems that can be inherent when we use AI. And that's what I want to talk about in this presentation, how AI literacy and information literacy is core to the way that we do education moving forward. So I want to talk a little bit about what I'm calling the disinformation age. So I started off talking about the information age and how it differs so significantly from the industrial age, which our current educational model was designed for. But without changing our model of education, our systems of education significantly, while I've been pushing for changes for the information age, we suddenly have found the advent of information technology, social media, and AI have squarely put us in what I'm calling the disinformation age. So there have been studies that show that social media, lies spread faster on social media than the truth. Since 1976, trust in the media has dropped from 72% to 31%. And another survey that I don't mention here had trust in the media for those who are on the right end of the spectrum of politics had dropped to 14% even back in 2021. We've seen observations of misinformation about climate change and the environment. So this question was essentially asking, have you observed misinformation in the last week about climate change in the environment? And found that in asking them in the last week, have you observed that 34% in the US reported that they had? That's 3 times more than countries like Taiwan and Denmark. That number was 53% regarding COVID back in 2021. So in a given week, 53% of respondents had said they had viewed misinformation about COVID. I don't cite it here, but I saw another report that estimated that COVID's impact and death toll was estimated to be 3 times that more because of issues of disinformation, pushback against vaccines, these sorts of things, than if that did not exist. 76% of respondents in the US think that political instability within the US is a bigger danger than external adversaries. AI is being leveraged for deep fakes, whether it's video, audio, or images, for micro-targeting. So political micro-targeting has been used to try to push against voting, to confuse targeting particular groups and confusing them, sending out misinformation about voting requirements, voting locations, all these sorts of things to try to limit voting. And weaponized bots are also being used to spread disinformation. I remember one of the eye-opening moments that I experienced on this was back when I was on Twitter. I'm a big Indianapolis Colts fan, and there was an issue with whether Colts players were going to be kneeling or not during the national anthem. So the vice president at that time showed up to the game, and then I think there were just a few members of the Colts, players on the Colts who did not kneel, but he left the game when they did not kneel, or when they kneeled for the national anthem. And within hours, this blew up on Twitter where people were posting about this, only to see that one of the bots that was doing all this posting had not shut off their information sharing where they were localized from. And the local news media who was responding back to us, this upsurge in posting, suddenly realized that the posting were coming from bots from Russia, because it was posting that it was coming from Moscow. People both posting on both sides of the issue, for and against kneeling for. Posting was coming from bots on both sides to create this uptick in anger and conflict on this social media website. So bots are being used on websites to being weaponized to create distrust with peers. Adams and his colleagues identified that information technology enables multitudes of interaction around false information, and that is impacting people's new ways of knowing, which is largely intersubjectivity. So how do other people feel about this? We have larger social networks now than just who we know in person, but who we know online. So information technology is creating false information around these conversations. Again, as I mentioned, that particular conversation, the bots were posting on both sides of the equation to essentially be dumping gasoline on the conversation and creating mistrust amongst people in their understanding of how others that they know feel about a given issue. So we have seen this around COVID. We've seen it around vaccines. We just had our first 2 deaths for child-related deaths for measles. Hadn't been any in the last decades, and now the lack of vaccination is having this disease start to spread in Texas and Arizona. And we saw our 2 first children, unvaccinated children, die because of that in the last week. So disinformation is having a profound effect, not only in our trust of societal entities like the media, our government and politics, our fellow citizens, how we engage around issues, whether or not we do engage and vote, whether or not we vaccinate, how we trust and view science. All of these things have come under attack through the leveraging of information technology like social media and AI, and that continues to grow. We've also seen the age of anxiety. I didn't get all the stats here I wanted in here, but we've seen significant, obviously the pandemic arose, and we saw a significant increase in anxiety and mental health disorders during the pandemic. That is starting to come down now over these last 3 to 4 years, but still remains at higher levels than pre-pandemic. We're seeing that with college students. Some surveys were reporting over twice the level of anxiety amongst college students than pre-pandemic. We're also seeing it in high school students with their levels of stress. So disinformation certainly feeds into this, but a lack of trust in, again, your sense of your peers and those around you also feeds into it. So we're seeing an increase in stress across age levels, but an increase in anxiety and depression as well amongst our college students, our high school students, society in general. So I want to preface this and pause, and again, invite anyone to ask any questions or interject as they would like. But this is an area that I've been jumping into more recently as a way to balance my strong interest in AI and how we can be leveraging it to transform the way that we learn, to also understanding that learning needs to change itself to account for the impact of these technologies. So my career has been focused on leveraging technology to promote personalized learning, but we need to have that with clear eyes and an understanding of it's not all sunshine when we look at these technologies. There are definitely negatives that arise with them as well. How can we manage these? How can we make sure that we are preparing people to be able to exist in this sort of environment? So I want to pause real quickly and just turn it over to you with this slide before I share my thoughts on it. And again, I'm just starting to dive into this recently, so I'm hoping to grow my understanding of this and establish a stronger argument for what I've been doing in this area. But how do you view learning as needing to change to account for the impact of these technologies, whether we're talking about social media, whether we're talking about artificial intelligence? I wanted to turn it over to you for a moment and look at what are your thoughts on this. So would anyone like to hop in and share their thoughts or questions? Any thoughts from anyone out there? I have some of my students in here, so I know they have thoughts. No biters. Okay, then let me go forward and talk to you about where I think we need to be heading. And that is in a variety of areas. So before I get into talking about information and media literacy, which I do think is core, particularly around issues like AI, let me talk to you a little bit about where I kind of got started with this, and that's around attitudinal learning. So to kind of go back to my history of looking at how I can leverage technology to promote systemic change of education and systems design, part of systems thinking and systems design methods is to focus on mindset change. Okay. So a reason behind this is because we have seen a long history of really innovative individual schools significantly change how they approach education. And then within decades, sometimes even less, they end up getting pulled back to the status quo. And systems theory tells us the reason behind that is because we do not exist in isolation, no matter what system we're talking about, but we exist within larger systems. So a school that changes to an innovative approach like personalized learning exists within a larger ecosystem of other schools that they're engaging with, of students coming from other schools that they engage with, of hiring teachers from other schools who are doing things in a different way, of interacting with colleges and universities who are used to dealing with schools that operate in a different way. So my focus has been on personalized learning and ways that we can do that with technology. And there are numerous and have been numerous schools that have operated in a different way than the standard schools do. So once I was giving a talk on this and had a participant raise their hand and say, I went to a school just like what you were talking about here in Indianapolis. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. You know, what school is it? And they said, well, it's not like that anymore. You know, it was like that while I was there. I was failing in the existing system, went to a new school, suddenly succeeded for the first time in my academic career. But after I graduated, it ended up changing up back to the traditional time-based system. that's not uncommon. We see that again and again of innovative schools coming about and being pulled back. So systems thinking tells us, one, if we want to change to a new system of education like personalized learning, we have to focus first and foremost on mindset change of our stakeholders. And that is because the status quo exerts a certain gravitational pull to keep things as they are, right? That's one reason why we have an educational system that is well past its expiration date in terms of meeting the needs of society, but still remains the same because it's difficult to enact change, right? It's difficult to change things. We see that in all sorts of systems, whether they're political systems, educational systems, financial systems. It's difficult to change this sort of thing. The system maintains itself. So mindset change is one of the core ways that we can build momentum. And one of the reasons I focus on leveraging technology is because I think technology is one of our most transformational aspects of modern society. So leveraging technology to also create momentum towards the new system that we're wanting to design. And so back in grad school, that was one of the components that I focused on was one, what would a learning management system focused on personalized learning look like? We called that a PI system, personalized integrated educational system. But two, how can we create mindset change around personalized learning to help create momentum both through technology and through mindset goals, desires of all stakeholders in the educational system to make that change. So recently that has shifted from a focus on mindset to a focus on attitudinal learning. And the argument essentially that we traditionally have had a very narrow cognitive focused goal for learning, that we're going to learn knowledge and we're going to learn skills, and that's going to be enough. But I think that with the problems that we face today, such as science literacy, trust in science, trust in media, these sorts of things, we've seen with the pushback against climate change and an overwhelming database of science showing that man is having an impact on climate change. Despite that, we've seen significant pushback from the public. So trust in science and understanding of how science works shows that cognitive is not always enough. So we've been investigating for the past 8 years or so, how can we as instructional designers, learning designers, how can we design specifically for attitudinal learning rather than just cognitive? Because this has honestly been something that's been around for a long time, particularly in like citizenship education, but it's been a hidden curriculum. So a hidden curriculum behind citizenship education has been embracing the values of democracy, for example, and active citizenship. That in a democracy, citizens have to be informed, they have to be active, they have to recognize that not doing so degrades and puts the democracy at risk. Those have been hidden components of citizenship education. They have been pushed traditionally in our social studies education, but they've been kind of not targeted and not assessed. Certainly, the assessments have been around rote knowledge, history, discussion of processes, these sorts of things, rather than what your attitude actually is and whether you embrace these sorts of ideals and enact them and behave in that sort of way. So that has led us to look at how can we design for attitudinal learning. And real briefly, I'll get into that. Our focus has been on one, how to assess what that looks like, how to assess the impact of instruction designed for that. We started by looking at massive open online courses. Our first course looked at trying to create activists around human trafficking, which has been an upswing on that, has been another byproduct of information technology and social media, of understanding that that is not a third world problem, that is a global problem in all communities across the entire world. So we looked at a MOOC behind that, and we looked at how she was trying to create activists across the globe and target their attitudes to say, this exists. Cognitively, this is not a problem that is not in your community. So trying to show them evidence that is everywhere. And then affectively, this is what's happening to people who are being trafficked. This is the scale of the problem. You must be outraged about this. And then behaviorally, you must do something to change your behavior to impact it. So in this particular MOOC, for example, this was a professor who had adopted multiple children out of foster care, whose focus was heavily on fighting human trafficking. And she described how one of the ways she changed her behavior was in learning how human trafficking was being enacted through the distribution system of Walmart, right? Walmart is a large system, so they were not actively trying to support trafficking, but it was being done under their watch through their distribution system, and traffickers were taking advantage of it in the shipping system and this sort of thing to traffic individuals. So that knowledge, that cognitive knowledge, helped her change her behavior to stop shopping at Walmart and try to support more local, less diversified businesses as a way to try to not contribute to the way that traffickers were leveraging that system. So there was new cognitive information being shared, affective targeting of this is how people are suffering and dying when they're being trafficked, and then equating that to behavioral change. We later saw another MOOC where it was animal behavior and welfare. Every professor who was a part of that MOOC was a vegetarian, but they went the complete other way and minimized affective and focused highly on the cognitive and the scientific process of identifying suffering in animals. So they did not push behavior changes for their learners, but just shared cognitive information. And that could be something that led to affective feeling and behavioral change. We also saw this in a face-to-face course on sustainability, where this professor would have a percentage of his students every time he taught the course would switch to become vegetarian or vegan, not because he was in any way pushing it, but just that he was sharing data about the sustainability of those diets compared to the standard diet. And then they would make that connection themselves after they got the cognitive information. So we did studies that looked at a variety of ways that attitudes could be changed. We incorporated a fourth component, which was social learning and how people interact, and how all these different components of attitude interact with each other to help shift attitude and behavior, which is a very difficult thing to do. How can we push a little bit down the line? How can we design instruction specifically to try to target that? So I still think that's a huge important issue. But the other issue is around this sort of thing of information and media literacy. When you can't trust the media that you're seeing, when I can listen to a podcast that there's no way I would know that was not two real people talking about my son's science fair project. I mean, it sounds completely real. You can no longer necessarily trust your ears. You can no longer trust your eyes. With deepfakes out there, you can no longer trust that the person that you're interacting with on social media is human and not a bot. So we really need to, while part of my work in AI is focusing on how can we leverage AI as a technology to personalize learning, another huge component has to be how can we create AI literacy, information literacy, media literacy, so that people can understand and thrive in these sorts of environments where they can trust whether or not what they're seeing is real, whether they can trust whether or not who they're interacting with is not taking, advantage of them. My parents, for example, are older and they keep being targeted by people who tell them their computer's infected, call this phone number to get help. They think they're calling Apple or they think they're calling Amazon. In reality, it's scammers who are trying to get access to their computer to get access to their financials and this sort of thing. This is another example of a growing problem of how information technology is being leveraged for this. So we need people to have literacy on how all this works, how AI works, how they can understand whether a source is legitimate or not, is a huge, huge issue. And critical thinking skills around this sort of thing of learning to trust whether the information you're getting is legitimate or not, or how you can confirm that. Even how to interact with AI, how to create prompts that are going to hopefully be getting you real sources that you can point to. The algorithms are getting better and better, and that means they're better and better at both what they do on the positive side for us and the negative side for us. So we need to be developing those critical thinking skills more than ever, and AI literacy, not only in how it works, but how to use it in an ethical way. Because students are going to be using this, and this is what teachers are telling me more and more lately, is that if they're using AI, it's because they feel compelled to help the students understand to use it right, rather than leaving the students to learn to use it on their own in an incorrect way or in a way that's going to get them in trouble. So they're trying to work with the students not to say you can never use AI to learn, but to say this is how you can use it in an effective way. This is how you can use it in a way that you can trust the information that you're getting. This is how you can use it as a way to amplify your critical thinking, your brainstorming, your creativity, rather than squashing it's out there. We can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's there. Students are going to be using it. It's a core need for us societally, as well as learners and instructional designers, to help our learners understand how to use it effectively rather than ignoring the problem. Finally, we talked about the stress, the depression, the anxiety that's coming about. Another area that I've been looking into is what we call positive education. Positive psychology is a study of psychologists who look at how we can help people develop what some people call a well-being literacy. Other people call it the science of happiness. But we have science that shows how we can improve, we can do behaviors and ways that we look at things to be happier than we are as individuals in society. Such as this was another MOOC that we studied that helped get us interested in this. We studied a MOOC on positive psychology, where they would have assignments every week where the learners in that MOOC would be asked to do a behavior, such as one week, write a letter to someone that you're very grateful for, because the science shows us that gratitude can hugely impact your level of happiness. So write a letter to someone that you are very grateful for what they've done in your life. And then the assignment the next week was call that person and read them your letter, and then write a journaling of what that experience was like. So they were essentially taking learners not only through the science of happiness and what the science says, but active behaviors of strategies that the science says can improve your happiness. And then they were having them assess themselves every week. Just a really quick reflect, you click on the smiley face that most reflects your level of happiness for that week, right? But be able to help them track their own reflection as, do I feel happier having implemented these specific behaviors, and be able to track that. So instructional design for positive education and well-being, instructional design for attitudinal learning, instructional design for critical thinking, instructional design for information, AI, and media literacy. And then the final piece, and I'm going to wrap up relatively soon so we have time for discussion and questions, what are just being called human skills. So AI is going to be some people call it disruptive, other people call it transformative. It is a disruptive and transformative technology. It's certainly not the first that we've had, the personal computer, calculators, even in a sense. The term calculator was a job title back before calculators, that you as a person, your job would be as a calculator, or a computer was also a job title. If you've ever seen the movie Hidden Figures, it talks about NASA's transition to computer usage, and the computers, the African-American women who were working for NASA, helping them work around this transition to computers and help improve their safety around that. Those were job titles that have gone away because of these disruptive technologies. AI is another one, and we are absolutely going to see a disruption in work, okay? There are certain jobs or job functions that exist today that are going to go away and will be replaced by AI. That doesn't mean all the jobs are going away. It means the jobs and the nature of work have to change. They will change with the advent of AI, including in higher education. So an important aspect that we look at needs to be human skills. We need to be shifting the learning outcomes that we focus on from things that AI does really, really well, such as spit out rote knowledge, instead of memorizing and testing people on, can you recall this particular fact? That makes no sense. We have technology in our pockets that can generate that information for us more accurately and faster than we ever as humans could. So it needs to be a case of not continuing to bang our heads against the wall and say, we're not going to change the sort of skills and knowledge that we're teaching for, because those are going to be antiquated and the jobs that rely on that are going to go away. That's just the reality. So we need to be instead switching towards human skills, such as empathy, such as critical thinking, such as collaborating with other humans and being a human face and interacting with humans in a particular way, of directing these sorts of powerful technologies around particular problems that we are thinking of and synthesizing around. We need to be looking at what AI does not do that well and making that the focus of what our learning is going to be, and not forcing AI to do things that it doesn't do well. So to talk about a caveat, there was an instance where I believe it was in California, where an AI chatbot was created to help students. A lot our learning, particularly since the pandemic, has increasingly gone online. So students are learning online. They may be learning with people in an online environment rather than face to face. We're seeing this in our workplaces as well, where more and more of our meetings, such as this one, are taking place online rather than face to face. So there's certainly an element of social isolation that can be happening as well. So this chatbot was created to help students interact and help guide them through their learning. And there was a case where a student who was feeling isolated and depressed started chatting with this bot and asking for its advice over how to deal with these feelings of isolation and depression. And the bot told the student that he should kill himself, and he did, right? A K-12 student. So this is an example of where not that AI couldn't be used to support those sorts of things, but there are human skills that AI is not going to do as well. And AI is only going to do what it is told to do. And it's only going to operate within the guardrails of what is being told to do. This is why we have so many dystopian movies about AI taking over the world, right? Is because AI enacts processes, and if those processes aren't carefully thought out, it can come up with these sorts of things where it's putting out information that would horrify its developers, but it's putting it out because it hasn't been told not to do so. And we have to deal with the consequences of that. So part of what we're looking at is understanding how AI works and how all these sorts of things function, but also focusing on teaching the human skill that AI is going to not be as good at, so that humans can really be driving the bus there and operating and understanding how to ethically and responsibly continue to deal with these sorts of technologies as we move forward. So again, this is an area that I've just been diving into recently. I'm going to continue to kind of expand my research and focus on. I've kind of gone from I'm continuing to look at how to leverage technology to transform education, but increasingly I'm looking at how the nature of learning needs to change, not just the system of education and the system of learning, but the nature and the goals of learning needs to change, given the impacts of information technology on our society, our global society, given the increasing distrust and isolation that's happening around information, around science, around our peers, around democracy, and the importance of engagement in that, all these sorts of things of taking learning objectives that might have existed but were largely background and not assessed. How can we design instruction and learning that's going to be raising those to the forefront and changing the goals and the objectives for what we learn and how we learn it to better fit the needs of a increasingly complex and divided society. Thank you. We have about 10 minutes for questions or further discussion or for people to share what they're doing as well. So thoughts, please.
Hi, Bill. I was wondering if there were any resources available that you would recommend to help people kind of see, like, how do you recognize, like, what are the signs that you would look for to see if an image might be AI? Like, are there any guides like that are available that you'd recommend?
So I would say I don't have a particular guide that I would put out there and say this is one that you're looking at. I think some AI is done well, some AI is done very poorly. We can see some that it's quite clear they're fake, and others absolutely not fake. We just had a news item this week. There was actually a video that had President Trump kissing Elon Musk's feet, and it was broadcast in government agency across their video screens. So this sort of fake, even from images, an image is something that you can kind of look at, but even active video has become an issue. We've seen, even here in Indiana, it was one of the schools reported on where deep fake nudes were being created of local high school students and shared across the high school by some of the students there. So it's absolutely an issue. There are ways that we can kind of look at it. I'm sure I don't have a specific platform. I don't know if anyone in there is aware of a specific platform specifically targeting that. But part of the issue is the target is always moving. We find out, so for example, we have a lot of platforms right now in terms of AI generated text that are advertising. Our platform will label whether your students are creating their writing assignments through AI. Well, more and more research is coming out that's showing that they're absolutely horrible at doing this. They're really, really bad at it. They really can't identify, and they're creating false positives and false negatives, both. Particularly targeting often non-native speakers, writers of English, that they will often flag them as creating AI or using AI to write things when they're not, because the algorithm's looking for particular ways that native speakers write things, and it's not reflecting people who have learned English as a second language, and they're getting flagged for that. So even with that, we have platforms that are advertising that. And then if you look out there, there will be an AI platform saying, our platform will defeat all of these platforms that are detecting your AI. And then on the other side of that, I had some students, I'm teaching a class in Purdue's online masters of AI, and I'm teaching a class on AI. And I had some students who, I have an AI statement in my syllabus that says you can use AI, you just have to document how you do it. But they missed that, and they, on their own initiative, were concerned I was going to be targeting them for writing with AI. So they ran it through an AI detector, and it kept saying that they'd used AI even though they hadn't. So they emailed me and said, we submitted 2 versions of our final assignment. One, it kept flagging as on AI, and so we kept changing it even though we hadn't used AI to say we didn't use AI. And it basically had winnowed down their writing to such a broad and vague and general component that it was by and large useless. So there are platforms out there. AI, anytime a platform is going to be identifying something, most likely there'll be another platform coming along shortly to try to circumvent that. So that's part of the challenge, is it moves so quickly. In general, with AI images, I would say there are certain things AI struggles with in creating with humans. Like, for example, it can struggle with things like the number of fingers you have. If you looked at the video that was created of the president and Musk, Musk's feet in that video actually were both like 2 left feet. I don't know if that was intentional, they were doing as a joke, or if that was just a byproduct of the AI video producer doing it. But that's often an issue with AI if it's generating images, is that there are certain things it can struggle with, like text. If you ask it to create something and there's text in the background, oftentimes there's misspellings and issues with that. So if you're trying to get around AI image generation, those are some of the things of looking at what AI struggles to do, like create humans that don't have 2 noses or 12 fingers or 2 left feet, having text in the image, because that's something that AI image generation struggles with. So you could be looking at that sort of thing, but I'm not aware. Long answer to a short question of, I'm not aware of a specific platform, but those are some of the guidelines, and there are additional guidelines out there for it. References about AI and disinformation. I do have a number, and there are more and more of those that are coming out there. So if you want to, Anna, if you want to email me, I can share you some of the sources that you can find on there. I would also say, one of the things AI does great is to look through vast amounts of data. So there are AI platforms that let you do literature reviews very quickly and efficiently and effectively. As always, you have to be able to have a critical eye and look for those errors and double check the responsibility or the results of that. But It's not Reader Rabbit. Reader Rabbit is an educational video game that was made in the 80s about reading. What is it called? Something Rabbit. There's a platform out there, a couple platforms out there for using AI for literature reviews that are super helpful in identifying stuff as well. Other questions or comments from anyone?
Do you have any recommendations for good sources of introduction to AI for someone like myself who just wants to know a broad understanding and will help me get in and then move on to more specifics?
So a couple things. One, I teach a course on game-based learning, educational game-based learning design. And we had some students who pitched their project to Purdue Online because Purdue Online offered an AI summit in Indianapolis last year, and that was funded. So they created an alternate reality game around AI, around the mystery of an AI researcher at Purdue, a professor who disappears, and trying to track that through. That game is still up. So I think that's a useful game in educating you and giving you, it's a fun introduction in my mind. It's called Trail, Trail. And I forget what that stands for, but if you reach out to me, I can certainly share that game, and this URL is still up if you want to play that. Purdue is also offering a number of workshops on using AI and how to use it, particularly around learning. Those are all being captured. So you can, those are called AI Bytes, BYTES. If you Google that, and they capture those workshops. Those are very useful in giving a short introduction to specific things like using AI for accessibility purposes, using AI to create quick questions around sources that you're using in your course. So they have a lot of stuff, particularly for instructional designers. That's a good short introduction. And I believe they have a general AI one as well. So those are two sources I might point you to. We also yesterday had our first lunch and learn around AI in education. Those are being offered every 2 weeks on Fridays on campus. So those are where you can just bring in your lunch and have a few snacks, and someone will practically walk you through particular AI platforms if you want to learn how to do those. There's a ton of platforms out there, and yes, thank you. AI is one of the platforms I was talking about. I forget the rabbit one, what it is called, but there are a couple out there. So those are a couple of sources I might mention to you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bill, I have kind of a loaded question. Hopefully I'll keep it short and you can maybe direct me in the right or send me in the right direction. But so our work at Gear Up over here in the College of Ed is with, low income, underserved communities here in Indiana, some of the toughest kind of schools right now in the state. But and engagement is just a huge issue that we keep hearing from principals and the concern. And so, my experience so far with like Conmigo or even ChatGPT or Notebook LM is that, for the kids that are already engaged, top 20% engaged kids, it's giving them more tools and it's awesome and it's great and they're going forward. And for the rest of the students, and especially the schools that we're at, they're not really interested in more tools. They've been given iPads their whole lives to like learn on, and they have, Khan Academy, all these things, and it just isn't engaging. So I was just curious if you have any thoughts on like where that next step could be headed in terms of answering some of those engagement questions for those like kind of, lower engaged students or students that aren't going to respond to another app and another, iPad based kind of technology.
Sure, it's absolutely. And again, that's been the driving force really behind my entire academic career, started around that concept of engagement and how do we engage people who have been trained by the system to be disengaged, because ultimately that's where we're at. It's a process of don't speak unless you're spoken to be passive. So even if they come in as active learners, they exit the system often as passive ones. So ultimately that's what led me to the focus on changing the system of it needs to be going from a teacher-centric to a learner-centric environment. I still incorporate the games piece around that. I did a study with a teacher who's a super hardworking. He worked so hard to engage his students. He told jokes. We went in and studied him when he was teaching in front of the classroom. And he put so much energy trying to engage them. And by the time of class, they would be gone, And then he spent 1 week teaching with a game, and they did all the activity. They were working on teams, playing together. It was loud, it was boisterous, just a totally different environment. So it's making that shift to a learner-centered, where again, they're not being bound by a calendar. They're being motivated through their particular interests and being given the freedom to work on projects that allow them to gauge around their particular interest while still meeting their particular needs. So really, I could talk about that for a long time, because that's my passion and that's what's been driving me. But that's why my focus shifted ultimately to systemic change. It went from I'm going to use games and insert them into the classroom to no, it's not enough. The system needs to change. We need to stop creating passive learners. We need to change the system so it's taking their passions. They come in as active learners. We need to keep them active learners and give them additional tools to pursue their passions and to not be punished for falling behind, to go at the pace that they're comfortable with, to learn in the ways that they want to learn. And that really means a complete transformation of the system. It's a matter of what leverage points can we use to make that happen. AI is another Band-Aid if we're just dumping it into the existing system. They're all Band-Aids. It's difficult really without changing that system as a whole to get that momentum to make it happen.
That's cool. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, Bill.
I have a similar question about a different, probably even a similar issue, the importance of giving students a viable level of resilience. And maybe I'm talking about the same thing. Is AI a viable, is it being used successfully in any way, or do you think it can be used to enhance each individual student's resilience in terms of dealing with learning and life in general?
So I would say a couple of things. One is that, again, I was highlighting that positive education movement, which is another piece. I don't necessarily see AI as the first stop for dealing with those, but I do think they have a place. We have seen some universities go with essentially the issue is there's a mental health crisis. At the same time, we are having people who are finally getting the message that mental health is something that they need to take seriously and that they could get help with. So at the same time that we're having an upswing in mental health issues, we lack the structure to support the need. So I have seen some universities that have looked at AI as a way for a first step for providing mental health resources. So a student doesn't have to wait a week or 2 weeks to get help. And at the same time, it can flag and highlight and say, no, this person needs help now, human help now, right? So there are ways people are trying to leverage AI to deal with that sort of issue. But again, I do think it's a bigger issue, and it needs to be equipping people to deal with the complexities and the stresses of the chaos of modern life and modern technology from an early age. It can't just be something where we say, oh, you need to try to be less stressed. We need to be teaching people very early on and consistently and repeatedly the actual tools. And again, some people call it wellness literacy, the tools to deal with these sorts of things at a more holistic level.
I've had a group working with some teenage kids in aviation, and they wanted to know more about making them what it boiled down to resilient. And I said, it's not a lesson. It's not a presentation that's going to achieve what you need. It's more complicated than that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bill, Jim here. In my career, last 40 years, and I spent several years at Illinois before coming here, and Minnesota before that, been to a few places. And my background was industrial education. So yes, the industrial age embraced industrial education and vice versa. During the industrial age, it pretty much embraced the teaching learning theory of behaviorism, very, very much so. The information age seems to have been, I don't know if totally embraced, but certainly wrapped around constructivism, teaching learning theory. The question is, given that background, AI, is it in the process of bringing us a new learning theory, new learning paradigm, or is it embracing existing ones that have already been around?
Well, I would say that one, I think while in the higher education level, we talk a lot about constructivism, I think we've seen it less employed It's more often been theoretical. And one of the main reasons behind that is because how we currently assess is largely for cognitive driven systems.
Mhm.
That was why one of my efforts for trying to move towards more personalized learning here at Purdue was a move to digital badges and competency-based learning so that we could essentially have students in our online masters in LDT, they had to demonstrate competency of their professional competencies that they were getting through their degree. It wasn't enough just to pass a course, right? They had to demonstrate that they could do the work, and we were tying that to specific evidence that the digital badges were storing so that they could put together at the end an e-portfolio that basically says, I can do these things and here's the proof why.
Mhm.
So, you know, Peg Ertmer used to teach here, and her focus was very much on problem-based learning and case-based learning, which I highly agree with, which are more, you know, constructivist-based approaches. But the challenge that we see is that, you know, it's difficult for the research to go out there and say, you are going to see gains in what politicians care about, which is test scores, because the tests are not testing things like critical thinking, right? They're not testing things like your ability to collaborate. So this is where I, again, putting that focus on the learning outcomes that we're focusing on. If we continue to focus on tests that are largely about regurgitating knowledge, it's difficult to implement things like constructivist approaches because that's not what they're good at, right? They're good at critical thinking, they're good at collaboration with others, they're good at problem solving skills, things that by and large we're not testing for, we're not assessing for much when we're determining the quality of an education. So part of what we need to look at is how can we shift? And I think the way and what we're assessing is a big component of that. And then certainly I think AI can play a point, you know, a part in that. Like I talked about our focus on a personalized uh, learning management system that we call PIES. A piece of that is identifying and helping to guide one, what are the learner's short-term and long-term goals? What are the components of learning, the standards that they need to be meeting and demonstrating competence in? What are the ways of instruction that align with their particular interests? Who can they be working with to develop optimally at an optimal level their learning in those particular areas? So an example could be group work. Oftentimes when we do group works in courses, students play the exact same role in every group, in every course that they're in, because this is what I'm good at. I'm good at writing, so I'm going to write up the final thing. I'm good at doing this, so I'm going to do that. I'm good at project management, so I'm going to do the project management. Well, that's not allowing other people to essentially develop their skills. So AI absolutely could be filling up the role of a lot of these sorts of things around planning, around identifying opportunities for instructional projects, around managing teams and making sure that we're tracking learning, around flagging learning deficiencies, all these sorts of things. The way that we do things nowadays are so teacher burdensome that the teacher has to do everything. They have to design the instruction, they have to design the assessment, they have to deliver the instruction, they have to manage it. So our teachers are not doing a lot of teaching, they're doing a lot of administrative work. AI can play a huge role in relieving some of that burden and allowing them to focus on, there's a student need here that's being flagged. How can I address that? How can I point the student to additional resources? All these sorts of things. I think it can play a huge role, but ultimately, again, the system as itself has to be able to change, and our goals for it have to be able to change for us to reach that.
Thank you. Other questions or comments for Bill?
I see people starting to drop out, but go ahead.
Outstanding stuff. I took a couple of screenshots just so I wouldn't lose it from my brain. Very valuable stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we are recording this so we can be sharing it up to YouTube. So look for the announcement that'll be sharing that link. The College of Education does have a playlist on their YouTube channel around AI as well as other components. So every time we have an AI related video that comes out of our activities or guest speakers that we have on campus, such as our conference last year, we offered our inaugural conference on AI and P12 education. We had a great speaker who came in to talk about some of these issues. That keynote is up there as well as other videos. So this one will be posted there. If you just look for Purdue College of Education, their YouTube channel, they have a playlist on AI. We are over time, so I'm sorry I didn't get to all the questions, but do check that out and do feel free to email me with questions that you have, and I'll absolutely get back to you on that.
Bill, thanks so much for your contributions today, and we really appreciate it and look forward to you continuing in the future. That said, next week we have Alyssa Kress, identifying and developing gifts and talents of underserved populations in gifted education. Be a good one, don't miss it. Thanks, Bill. Have a great weekend. Stay well.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, Jim, if you hear anything about anything being posted, let me know, okay?
Will do.
Thank you. All right. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.